Here's a live look as a man has been seriously injured in a stabbing in Brampton. We are awaiting an update from the police on the investigation. And a crash on the 401 that resulted in the deaths of a couple and their infant grandchild is raising questions about the police's actions during the pursuit of a robbery suspect. And Leafs, they live to fight another day after a thrilling win in overtime last night. We're going to have reaction from Leafs fans coming up. Good afternoon and welcome to CP24 Live at noon. I'm Bakari Savage. A man has been seriously injured in a stabbing. This happened in Brampton. It happened around 8:30 this morning at Baycliff Crescent and Crossville Road near Credit View Road and Veterans Drive. Police say that the man was rushed to hospital with life-threatening injuries. Investigators also say that there's no suspect description at this time. And a motorcyclist is dead after a crash on the 401 this morning. It happened shortly after 7 o'clock in the collectors at White's Road. And the victim was rushed to hospital without vital signs. That's where he was pronounced dead. And police have closed the highway for the investigation. OPP Sergeant Kerry Schmidt joined us live with an update earlier.
Witnesses reported seeing this motorcycle just prior to the crash, lane splitting, high rates of speed, aggressive driving. Again, the kind of behavior that is one of the leading causes of death and injury on our highways. Crash happened right at just after 7 o'clock, 7:12 a.m. was when we got the call. The 27-year-old rider from Toronto has been pronounced deceased. We do have the 401 westbound collector lanes at White's Road closed for the collision reconstruction investigation.
The driver of the pickup truck was not hurt, but police want to speak to any witnesses or anyone who may have dash cam footage of the crash. Well, the collision on the Highway 401, which resulted in the deaths of a couple and their infant grandchild, is raising questions about the police's actions during the pursuit of a robbery suspect. So the collision happened around 8 o'clock Monday night in Whitby after about 20 minutes after police responded to a robbery call at an LCBO in Bowmanville. Well, Durham officers pursued the suspect who was driving a cargo van. The suspect eventually entered the 401 at Stevenson Road, but was driving the wrong way into oncoming traffic. And shortly after, the deadly collision occurred. It also killed the suspect. And footage and accounts from other drivers shows dozens of police cars following the suspect on both sides of the highway. The SIU is investigating. A CTV public safety analyst and former OPP Commissioner Chris Lewis says that he understands the public outcry over how this was handled by police.
Busy traffic at high speeds over what may have been, kind of a minor robbery. It wasn't a homicide. It wasn't a kidnapping. It looks like a kind of I hate to say it, but almost like a day-to-day occurrence. And so it's really tough to justify, even though I don't know all the facts at this point. It's tough to justify that the action they took, going the wrong way in the highway, was the right action. But as things unfold, we find out more. I may change that opinion, but it's pretty tough to ever justify continuing a chase like that in that fashion in any circumstances.
And the victims' identities haven't been released yet. Well, Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre was kicked out of the House of Commons yesterday for comments that he made about Prime Minister Justin Trudeau during question period.
Since the NDP has asked him to reverse course on his and formerly their radical policy, 22 British Columbians have died of drug overdoses. But he continues to allow those drugs to kill the people in our hospitals and on our public transit. When will we put an end to this wacko policy by this wacko Prime Minister?
No. I'm going to ask the Honourable Leader of the Opposition to withdraw that term, which is not considered parliamentary.
Mr. Speaker, I replace wacko with extremist. He is an
The Honourable Member to please.
Well, after some back and forth, Poilievre refused to withdraw his comments. As a result, House Speaker Greg Fergus ordered Poilievre to leave. All Conservative MPs left with the party leader. Poilievre's comments were related to a recent request by BC to make public drug use illegal again. Well, Poilievre joined CP24 from Ottawa earlier and doubled down on his comments about calling many of the Trudeau government's policies wacko.
The BC NDP government even thinks this is wacko. They have asked him to reverse the policy. But it's worse than that. He's now considering bringing the same drug legalization of crack, heroin, and other hard drugs in your parks, in your hospitals in Toronto. He has a request in from the Toronto City Hall to do that. We've already seen that 2,500 people die as a result of this policy happening in BC.
Poilievre says that he would reverse the policy of funding opioid replacement drugs and instead put money into treatment and recovery. Well, the Leafs scored early in overtime to beat the Bruins 2-1 and force a Game 6 back in Toronto tomorrow night. And CP24's Courtney Hills is outside of Scotiabank Arena with reaction from fans. And Court, I'm pretty sure people are over the moon.
Yeah, good afternoon, Bakari. Leafs fans feeling pretty good after that win there last night, 2-1 for the Leafs in overtime. This has been a roller coaster ride for many fans, a roller coaster ride of emotions over the last couple of games in this series, and really the last couple of years, at least that's what fans are telling me. So where we are, we're inside, just inside Union Station here, outside of the gates to Scotiabank Arena. Behind me here, you see lots of blue and white, lots of blue and white, really right downtown Toronto, because fans are, as they say, feeling good. It was incredibly difficult to kind of go through the last couple of games. As it stands right now, Boston still has the lead, though, in this series 3-2. I want to let you hear from some fans how they're feeling looking to Game 6 here in Toronto.
Celebrating the overtime win was good. Great goal by Nyes, but yeah, game 6 back here, and we'll see how it goes.
I think it's just going to be electric downtown tomorrow, because I know I was here last night, and a lot of people were like me, you know, we didn't really have a lot of hope going into it, but with a big overtime win, I think that gives a lot of adrenaline, so I think everyone's going to be really excited for it tomorrow night.
And you know the fans are going to be excited going into tomorrow night. So Game 6 here at home. Hopefully the Leafs will be able to feed off the momentum of being here at home and hearing from the fans both inside Scotiabank Arena, that is, but also outside. We know there will be hundreds, if not thousands of people packed outside of Scotiabank Arena taking in Maple Leaf Square. That was the place to be last night. That's definitely going to be the place tomorrow. But keep in mind, you do need to secure your spot inside of the square online by going through the MLSE app. So that opens at 1 o'clock this afternoon. Hopefully you're lucky enough to secure a spot. If not, you can watch at home. I think it's safe to say, Bakari, fans will be nervous about tomorrow night's game, but also pretty excited for this one too. Over to you.
Yeah, nervous excitement. CP24's Courtney Hills. Thank you.
Yeah.
Well, along with that, TSN Radio's Matt Koss says that last night was a more complete effort from the Leafs.
They scored first, very different than what we saw in Game 4 as well. And it was Jake McKay, but I love the fact it was Max Domi, Ty Domi's son, winning the faceoff that set that one up. I think one of the biggest indicators that this game was different was there was only one penalty kill that the Maple Leafs were on, and they did a great job. Boston didn't get one shot on their power play, so that made you feel a little bit more calm as well. And then when overtime starts, you just basically hide and hope for the best.
Well, it's still not clear if Austin Matthews is going to be able to return to the lineup for Game 6, which, again, it goes tomorrow night right here in Toronto. Well, overall, it was a mixed bag of results for Canadian NHL teams last night, with the Leafs living to see another game, and at least one team is going home for the summer. And CTV's Scott Hurst joins us live right now with more. So, Scott, we have to talk about results and surprises.
Bakari, a whole range of emotions for Canadian hockey fans, as you mentioned, and as Courtney mentioned in her report, relief for Leafs Nation as the team lives on to play another game with Game 6 tomorrow night in Toronto. Not the same emotion for Winnipeg Jets fans. Unfortunately, that team is going home after losing 4 straight, winning the first game of the series, but then losing 4 straight. The Jets become the first Canadian team eliminated from the playoffs. They won the opening game of the series, then lost 4 straight. It was a whiteout in Winnipeg, sold out inside the arena and huge crowds outside too. And this is an upset as Winnipeg was the higher seed, and they also swept the season series 3-0 with Colorado. So disappointment for fans inside and outside as Colorado moves on. The Jets allowed 5 or more goals in each of their first 5 games, ultimately losing this final game 6-3. And you can see the disappointment on the face of those fans. Let's go further out west. Canucks fans, they're still in it. However, they couldn't close out their series last night against Nashville. The Predators kept their season alive. A 2-1 win over the Canucks despite a raucous crowd in Vancouver just on the edge of Falls Creek. Canucks now down to their third-string goalie as well. Vancouver poured it on early, but not much offensively. Couldn't get anything past Nashville in the first two periods. Vancouver getting on the board first, but Nashville scoring 2 goals in the third to win it, 2-1, as I mentioned. Canucks fans hoping to close it out on home ice, but they're not done yet. They're still in the driver's seat in the series. Here's how Canucks fans felt leaving the arena last night after the loss.
It's not over. It's not over. We're up 3-2 right now. We're going to go back to Nashville, and we're going to win that game.
I mean, Game 6 is ours. Back to Nashville. Hopefully we can get it. Let's go Canucks. Let's go.
All right, Picard, the other Canadian team we haven't talked about because they didn't play last night, the Edmonton Oilers, have a chance to win their series tonight on home ice.
Okay, let's go live to breaking news. This is in Brampton. Police are providing an update after a man was rushed to hospital following a stabbing this morning.
Making all investigative efforts to determine the cause of this. We don't have any information to release on suspects at this time. However, I can confirm that we are actively looking for the sole suspect that is involved in this incident. We'll open it up to questions briefly at this time. However, I would just like to remind everyone that this is a very fresh and ongoing investigation, so we're limited as to how much we can confirm at this time.
Where was the victim? Where is it believed that the stabbing happened? Did it happen inside a unit, outside a unit? What can you share about that?
So the specific location of where this occurred is currently being investigated. We can confirm that the victim was located close to a unit on the second floor of the building you see behind me. However, the exact location of where this occurred, where the interaction occurred, whether it occurred in one location or whether it was ongoing through multiple areas of the apartment building, that's still part of the investigation.
Is the victim a resident here?
The victim's exact affiliation to this apartment building is part of the investigation, so we will be looking into that. However, we do believe that the suspect and victim were familiar with each other, so this is an isolated incident, and we don't believe there to be any further risk to public safety at this location stemming from this incident. We're still working on the appropriate notifications for the family members of the victim, so I can't get into too much detail. However, we can confirm that it's an adult male.
And have any witnesses from the unit?
At this point, we've had lots of cooperation from the community members that reside in the area, both those who are familiar with this particular incident as well as those who are familiar with the individuals involved. But again, we are urging for anyone else that has any further information, whether or not you think it's relevant, it would really help paint a picture of what occurred to our homicide investigators.
Was there an altercation or anything leading up to this? Any reason to believe that maybe this was some sort of a robbery or anything like that?
Those are things that our investigators will be looking into, the circumstances immediately before this incident occurred and why things escalated to the point that they did. However, it's too early to comment on that at this time. We'll conclude questions there, and any future information on this incident will be provided via news release. Thank you very much.
Okay, so we just heard from police an update on a stabbing that happened around 8:30 this morning at Baycliff Crescent and Crossbill Road. That area, this is near Credit View Road and Veterans Drive. A man was stabbed. This is now being investigated as a homicide. So there's no suspect information, but police are actively looking for a sole suspect. The suspect and the victim, they do know each other. So this is considered an isolated incident. We will continue to follow the story and bring you the latest as it develops. Well, coming up next in CP24 Live at noon, we're going to speak to Toronto's top doctor about decriminalizing drugs in the city. McGill University officials are waiting to see how Montreal police plan to respond to their request to clear a pro-Palestinian encampment on the school's grounds. And for the latest on the situation, let's go live right now to CTV Montreal's Matt Grillo, who is on McGill's campus. Matt, take us through our last conversation from just about 24 hours ago to right now.
Yeah, so essentially, the big development that everybody's waiting for is this court injunction that was argued yesterday at the Montreal courthouse. Of course, that's a lawyer who's representing a couple of McGill students, arguing essentially to have this encampment shut down. The lawyer, brought forward the argument that he wants his clients to feel safe at the place that they study at, of course, McGill University, and especially during exam time. Now, this lawyer is also asking the court to set up a perimeter on campus that would allow protesters to exercise their rights and continue protesting, but it would also allow his clients to go to school and to be able to access the facilities. Now, on the flip side of things, there are lawyers representing the Student Society of McGill who are saying and who are arguing that blocking free speech in such a popular area like this in the heart of downtown Montreal is wrong. The judge is going to have to weigh those arguments and is likely currently doing that. We were expecting a decision to come down on the injunction sometime this morning. That doesn't appear to be the case so far. So everyone is really keeping an eye on this injunction here. Police watching that as well. They told me earlier this morning that they're waiting for the injunction and for the decision to come down on that injunction. And then at that point, it seems as though they'll decide their approach going forward. Police very clear in all of this, though. They don't want anything to be violent. They want a calm approach by police, and they certainly don't want any force used.
Okay, so that was CTV Montreal's Matt Grillo, who is on the campus of McGill University. We're going to go back to him a little bit later for more on that developing situation. Well, Toronto's medical officer of health is speaking out after BC is rolling back its decriminalization of drugs in public. And this comes as federal Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre has written a letter to the Prime Minister asking Justin Trudeau to reverse his support for the decriminalization of drugs in Toronto. Right now, we're joined live by Dr. Eileen Davila, Toronto's medical officer of health. Dr. Davila, good afternoon. Thanks for joining us. I want to start with the statement that you released, this portion, quote, decriminalization is not legalization. Can you talk about that?
Yes, I can, Bakari. Decriminalization is indeed not legalization. It's actually fundamentally at its core looking at the issue of addiction and addressing it as a health issue. It is saying that actually it is not a criminal issue to suffer an addiction, but rather something that needs to be managed as a health issue. And when Canadians are asked about that very question, the vast majority of them agree that indeed addiction is something that should be managed as a health issue. And that's basically what is at the core of decriminalization.
And along those lines, let's talk about what is being learned from what we're seeing in BC and how that's going to affect what happens in Toronto.
Well, I think when we look at what's happening in BC, the issue is that they recognize that decriminalization is not a criminal issue. The issue around, or drugs and addiction are not a criminal issue. We cannot arrest our way out of the circumstances. And in fact, we see that this is borne out in the evidence. The challenge that is being experienced at this time, and I think their request to the federal government relates to public use. And as I tried to make very clear in my statement, the issues around public use are a completely separate issue. It should not be okay to actually just light up in a playground or to inject on the subway or on a bus, right? The real issue here is that we have a significant health issue. Decriminalization is one part of the solution, but we also know that there are a variety of other issues at play here. We need access to better treatment. We need access to better prevention opportunities. And of course, we need access to major supports, including housing and supportive housing, if we're to actually address this very complex health issue fulsomely and properly.
Dr. Davila, do you see how that can be a little bit of a confusing message to a lot of people?
Well, I think it's pretty clear to most people that when we're talking about addiction, that it is a health issue and something that cannot be addressed as a criminal issue. Again, we cannot arrest our way out of this. Like many other health conditions, you actually have to take a very fulsome approach. So we need things like prevention. We need things like treatment. There is no question that has to be part and parcel of it. But the more we criminalize things, we have seen this borne out over time, the more you actually drive the behavior underground and make things unsafe. And unsafer not only for people who use drugs, but frankly for the entire community around them as well.
And I'd also like to ask your input, your thoughts on Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre's letter.
Well, I think what I heard from the Conservative leader is that he's interested in things like treatment and detox and rehab. And I think fundamentally at its core, what that speaks to is that addiction is a health issue. Consistent with that is decriminalization and as well making sure that all the services are available. Unfortunately, at this time, when I look at what's happening in this province, it's actually not easy to get access to treatment. So I couldn't agree more that there's a need for better access to treatment. We know that people are literally waiting months and in some cases over a year to be able to access service. That needs to be addressed. But fundamentally, this is about treating addiction as a health issue and recognizing that taking care of this health issue means making sure that we take care and provide the appropriate supports to people who use drugs. And yes, as well, to make sure that we balance that out with community safety. These are not inconsistent. In fact, they're part and parcel of the same thing.
Okay, Toronto's Medical Officer of Health, Dr. Eileen Davila. It's always a pleasure. Thank you.
Nice to see you, Bakari. Thank you.
And coming up next on CP24 Live at noon, we're going to speak to criminal defense lawyer Daniel Brown about the questions surrounding a police pursuit on the 401 and the deadly crash that followed. A crash on the 401 which resulted in the deaths of a couple along with their infant and grandchild is raising questions about the police's actions during the pursuit of a robbery suspect. And for a closer look at this, we're joined live in studio by criminal lawyer Daniel Brown. Let's kind of start off with just your reaction to watching this video and the law.
Well, I mean, first of all, this is the type of thing we see in like a Hollywood action movie. We don't see cars driving the wrong way on the 401 very often because the police know better than to engage in the type of police chase they did here that would have resulted in a very serious accident with the tragic consequences that it did.
And speaking of the tragic consequences, let's talk about, the victims, their, possible legal recourse, and then also the witnesses, because there were a lot of people who saw this.
Yeah, so now this job is really in the hands of the Special Investigations Unit. The police there are going to speak with all of those witnesses, anyone that might have video or have any type of information to provide. There is, of course, the radio communications between the officers and dispatch. So there's a lot of sources of information about what happened here and why it happened. And then that leads to the potential of criminal charges, for example, a dangerous driving causing death, criminal negligence causing death, or even potential civil lawsuits for the families of the loved ones that they lost or the people that were injured in the accident themselves.
Can you talk about the legal parameters that surround this?
Yeah, so a dangerous driving causing death is a really serious offense. And now we allow our police officers to sometimes speed above the speed limit, even go through stop signs or red lights, but they can't do that in all circumstances. So it starts with the police, before they can even begin a high-speed pursuit, have to think about, is this the only way I could arrest this person? If it's not the only alternative to arresting this person, they can't even start the police chase. That's what Ontario's laws say about police chases like this. Even then, they have to assess always, not just at the beginning of this police chase, but all the way through, is the risk of harm in letting the suspect go greater than the risk of continuing and putting other people in harm's way? And so the analysis about who they're after, why they're after them, what type of harm that person might cause, where it might lead if they don't, this is all going through the minds of the police officers, weighed against what's going to happen if I'm driving the wrong way down the highway, and who could get hurt if we continue that.
What about the SIU investigation?
And, well, the SIU investigation, it may take a bit of time. In fact, many SIU investigations take months, sometimes more than a year to complete. But what happens at the end of it is they will either decide to lay criminal charges or not. Regardless of whether criminal charges are laid, we can assume that there are going to be lawsuits, because the legal standard to establish proof in a civil lawsuit where someone is suing over money is way different than the criminal consequences that come from a criminal charge.
And takeaways from this, especially, as it relates to this happening previously.
Yeah, well, I mean, this is something that has happened before. Unfortunately, in 2014, a York Region police officer was in pursuit of a suspect in an unmarked police car. He struck a pedestrian who was crossing the road. He was prosecuted and convicted of dangerous driving causing death and was sentenced to an 8-month sentence, which may seem like a slap on the wrist. In fact, it would likely be higher now. But what the judge said at that time was that he hoped that this was a message to other police officers not to engage in this type of conduct. And police do know better. Common sense would have dictated this is not a safe situation. And given who they were after, this was really a reckless course of action for the police.
Okay, criminal defense lawyer Daniel Brown, thank you very much for your time.
Thanks for having me.
I appreciate it. Well, coming up next on CP24 Live at noon, we continue to follow breaking news. This is out of Brampton. A man has been fatally stabbed. The latest on the investigation coming up. We have breaking news. A man's dead after being stabbed. This is in Brampton. You're looking at the mobile command center. It happened around 8:30 this morning at Baycliff Crescent and Crossville Road in that area. This is near Credit View Road and Veterans Drive. Police say that the man was rushed to hospitals with life-threatening injuries, but he later died. Investigators also say that there's no suspect description at the time, but do believe that the suspect and victim knew each other. And also a motorcyclist is dead after a crash on the 401 this morning that happened shortly after 7 o'clock at the Collectors at White's Road. The victim, a 27-year-old Toronto man, was rushed to hospital without vital signs. That's where he was pronounced dead. And police have closed the highway for the investigation. There were reports of the motorcycle speeding on the highway shortly before the crash. OPP Sergeant Kerry Schmidt joined us live with an update.
No other injuries reported. The motorcycle went into the back of a pickup truck on the westbound 401 collector lanes, and CPR and first aid was administered immediately. Unfortunately, he was transported to a hospital where he was later pronounced deceased.
And police are asking to speak to any witnesses or anyone who may have dash cam footage of the crash. Right now it's 12:32, 11 degrees, feeling like 12 outside. Let's get a check on the roads with Adjoa Nsia. Has the fog burned off yet? Do you still see it on the roads?
You know what? The fog is definitely starting to lift. You're seeing sun in certain areas, a little bit of fog on the Gardner, but all things considered, it's not too bad. Things are going to get better as the afternoon rolls along. But if you're on the westbound lanes of the 401, as you were discussing that fatal collision investigation, well, unfortunately, it does continue. Looks like they were going to reopen all lanes. Hasn't happened yet. So the collector lanes on the westbound 401 still shut down from White's over to Port Union because of the fatal collision investigation, which happened. No traffic is getting by. They haven't even opened the on-ramp from Port Union yet. So you're still being forced in the express lanes. Getting word from MTO and OPP that they plan to reopen within the next 30 minutes or so. So once that happens, we will keep you in the know. Further west on the 401 on the exit ramp that does take you to the Gardner. Crews dealing with the collision that does have the left lane of that ramp blocked. We had problems southbound 427 ramp to the eastbound Gardner. It was the two left lanes blocked to the collision. That problem cleared and was seeing a bit of fog, and you can see it starting to lift Bakari on the Gardner westbound, but still looking at delays as you make your way out of the downtown core from Jarvis out towards Dufferin through the construction zone. I'll send it back to you, Bakari.
The CP24 traffic report is brought to you by CapitalDirect.ca.
A collision on Highway 401 that resulted in the deaths of a couple along with their infant grandchild. It's raising questions about the police's actions during the pursuit of a robbery suspect. The collision happened around 8 o'clock Monday night in Whitby, about 20 minutes after police responded to a robbery call at an LCBO in Bowmanville. Durham officers pursued the suspect, who was driving a cargo van. The suspect eventually entered the 401 at Stevenson Road, but was driving the wrong way into oncoming traffic. And shortly after, the deadly collision occurred, which also killed the suspect. The footage and accounts from other drivers shows dozens of police cars following the suspect on both sides of the highway. The SIU is investigating. And CTV public safety analyst and former OPP Commissioner Chris Lewis joined us with more on police protocols when it comes to pursuing a suspect.
Only in very serious circumstances when, safety and considerations for the public are really first and foremost, would you ever continue? And so middle of the night, 3 o'clock in the morning with no traffic in a remote area, that's one thing. But from there, as things increase, traffic increases, bigger threat to public safety, and depending on the severity of the incident that occurred that precipitated it, you're constantly saying, okay, do I need to do this? Do we need to continue this? Are we going to get hurt, kill innocent people? And of course, this case ended up being one of the worst.
The victims' identities have not been released. Well, today is Doctors' Day in Ontario. Several ceremonies are going to take place across the province to mark the day, which is aimed at expressing thanks to Ontario's doctors. The provincial government proclaimed May 1st Doctors' Day in 2011, and the date was chosen to commemorate the birthday of Canada's first woman physician, Dr. Emily Stowe. Well, president of the Ontario Medical Association, Dr. Andrew Park, joined us earlier to talk about the importance of this day and also some of the challenges faced by physicians in the province.
It's tough going these days, and certainly for those without a family doctor, that's been one of our major priorities, to say that this is the foundation of our healthcare system and that we need to look at all layers, but certainly with 2.3 million Ontarians without a family doctor, that's been a key priority for us. Longer term than that, we're also looking at our own physicians, our own members who are dealing with high levels of burnout and stress, from the perspective of the OMA, to just say to our members, we hear you and we see you, but we also want to take a moment to thank you, because oftentimes, we go about our daily busy lives and we just don't take that moment to say thank you to doctors.
According to a recent Ontario College of Physicians study, 2.3 million Ontarians do not have a family doctor. Well, Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre was kicked out of the House of Commons yesterday for comments that he made about Prime Minister Justin Trudeau during question period.
Since the NDP has asked him to reverse course on his and formerly their radical policy, 22 British Columbians have died of drug overdoses. But he continues to allow those drugs to kill the people in our hospitals and on our public transit. When will we put an end to this wacko policy by this wacko Prime Minister?
No. I'm going to ask the Honourable Leader of the Opposition to withdraw that term, which is not considered parliamentary.
Mr. Speaker, I replace wacko with extremist. He is an
The Honourable Member to please.
Well, after some back and forth, Poilievre refused to withdraw his comments. As a result, House Speaker Greg Fergus ordered Poilievre to leave. All Conservative MPs left with the party leader. Poilievre's comments were related to a recent request by BC to make public drug use illegal again. Well, Poilievre joined CP24 from Ottawa earlier and doubled down on his comments about calling many of the Trudeau government's policies wacko.
Yesterday, I was trying to get the Prime Minister to commit that he wouldn't import this wacko idea to Toronto, which is already reeling from his catch-and-release criminal justice system in car thefts, extortions, carjackings, and deadly violent crime. And he wouldn't do it. Instead, he divided and distracted with fear and falsehoods. His policies are wacko.
Poilievre says that he would reverse the policy of funding opioid replacement drugs and instead put money into treatment and recovery. Well, the Leafs scored early in overtime to beat the Bruins 2-1 and force a Game 6 back here in Toronto tomorrow night. And CP24's Courtney Hills is outside Scotiabank Arena with reaction from fans. And Courtney, I believe you summed it up like this: nervous excitement?
Yeah, I think that's probably the best way to put it, Bakari. Fans obviously really excited. We're now going into Game 6, but also feeling pretty nervous. I mean, Boston's been pretty dominant throughout this series. Also nervous after that game last night. It was very, very close. As you mentioned, went into overtime. 2-1, the final score for the Leafs. So today we're talking to those fans. Where we are, Bakari, we're just outside of Scotiabank Arena here. Everywhere you go in the city, lots of blue and white. Again, fans telling me, they've been nervous, excited, describing this as really an emotional roller coaster. I'll let you hear from some of those fans who I talked to this morning.
It's like every year thing where it's like the Leafs, like they get their fans like so hyped up and then they always kind of like let us down. So for the fact that they brought it back to Toronto for the Game 6, just hopefully they can win the next two and, finally get over the hump.
Not even the past couple games, it's year after year. It seems to be the same thing over and over. So hopefully this year is a bit different and we go to round 2 and we can actually be successful, but we'll see what happens.
Yes, we will see what happens tomorrow night. So Toronto returning back home for the big Game 6. Remember, Boston still has the lead in this series 3-2, but the fans we're talking to obviously hoping Toronto can tie it up and push this into a Game 7. So again, Bakari, a lot of people feeling really, really good about that game last night, but they are nervous. So looking into tomorrow, we expect it to be packed once again in Maple Leaf Square. That's just outside of Scotiabank Arena. Usually we see hundreds, if not thousands of fans watching the game from that area, but you do need to go onto the MLSE app in order to secure a spot there. It's free to get in, but because the demand is so high, you have to go online to make sure you are able to secure a spot to get in there tomorrow night. Gates will open at 6, puck drop 8 o'clock. Over to you.
All right, thanks a lot, Courtney. And coming up next on CP24 Live at noon, we're going to have an update on the protest at McGill University. We're following breaking news out of Montreal. This is where a judge has rejected an injunction request to remove protesters from an encampment at McGill University. McGill University officials had asked Montreal police to clear a pro-Palestinian encampment on the school's grounds. Demonstrators say that they will not take their tents down until the university divests from companies profiting off the war in Gaza. The school says that the encampment is illegal. Well, south of the border, more than 300 people were arrested as police removed pro-Palestinian protesters at Columbia University in New York City. The Columbia University building was occupied for about 24 hours, an extension of an encampment at the Ivy League school, which was set up about 2 weeks ago. The police, some of them in tactical gear, they entered the campus in Upper Manhattan and loaded about 50 detainees onto a bus, each of them with their hands bound behind their backs by zip ties.
Requests we received in writing could not have been clearer. While those who broke into the building did include students, it was led by individuals who are not affiliated with the university. The school needed the NYPD's assistance to clear Hamilton Hall and the encampments outside, a dual operation on the grounds that took place successfully, clearing the tents, taking back and reclaiming Hamilton Hall.
Well, police in riot gear moved in to break up clashes between pro-Palestinian and pro-Israeli protesters. This is at UCLA, the University of California, Los Angeles. The violence erupted outside an encampment. This is where the pro-Palestinian protesters had set up barricades, and the counter-demonstrators tried to tear them down. People threw chairs. Some beat others with sticks. Officials say that security has been tightened at the campus. At least a dozen people were arrested at the University of Wisconsin as police removed protesters and their encampment. And police moved in this morning with shields, resulting in a scrum. And protesters chanted, "Students, hold your ground," and "Long live Palestine." The protesters' tents and belongings were loaded into a dump truck. And then riot police also made arrests after moving in on a pro-Palestinian encampment at the University of Arizona. Some protesters threw water bottles, trash, and other objects at officers. And police approached the encampment after demonstrators failed to comply with an order to leave campus. The school issued a statement saying that its president has asked officials to enforce campus use policies and all corresponding laws. And Canadian caregivers are spending large parts of their days looking after elderly, disabled, or sick family members. And a survey of about 3,100 caregivers finds that most provide an average of 5 hours of care every day. The Canadian Centre for Caregiving Excellence is urging the federal government to develop a national strategy that recognizes the mental and financial toll on caregivers as the population ages. It says that its survey shows the need for caregiver compensation, easily accessible home care, and workplace support for people juggling work and care. Well, it's not yet known how a movement that began on social media is going to impact business at Loblaw.
There's not much that we can do, so we got to start somewhere.
And the Boycott Loblaws movement, it began on Reddit, and the group now has more than 60,000 members. There's a list of demands from the organizers, including Loblaw signing on to the Grocery Code of Conduct and committing to affordable pricing. Well, BNN Bloomberg's Paul Bagnall spoke about Loblaw's latest earnings report.
Loblaw also says, and it is the target of a lot of criticism, but it says its food prices in the quarter rose by less than the food inflation number reported by Statistics Canada. That number reported by StatsCan most recently was 2.6%. Loblaw says its food prices rose by less than that.
And in a statement to CTV News, Loblaw says in part that they're going to continue to do what they can to combat inflation in their stores. Well, coming up next on CP24 Live at noon, we're going to talk to podcast host John Viveros about how the Leafs are looking for games. Oh, there he is. John, hey, you're coming up after the break. Don't go anywhere, okay? The Leafs live to fight another day. This is after a thrilling win in overtime last night, Boston. So they're bringing the series back home for Game 6 tomorrow. Right now, we're joined live by John Viveros, the host of Hot Take Hockey Podcast. John, I'm going to start off with this. Okay, so last night, I'm sitting at home. I turn on the hockey game, and Jamie looks at me, and she goes, "You're watching hockey?" I say, "Yeah, this is a big game. This is exciting." Let's talk about how big last night was.
Bakari, it was absolutely huge when you look at just all the circumstances of last night's game. When you look at no Austin Matthews, you look at TD Garden in Boston, you look at so many perspectives with this team. Everything pointed towards them losing this game. And I think when you look at the Toronto Maple Leafs on the road and with less expectations, less pressure, they actually usually do pretty well. So I think that's what you saw last night, but in more of a kind of grinded out playoff style victory. One goal early on from Jake McCabe really set the tone for the Leafs, but then a bad giveaway from Simone Benoit, deflection off Patrick Maroon, and then of course it's a 1-1 hockey game the rest of the way. Matthew Knies ends up being the hero, but so many different elements from depth guys and specifically guys that Brad Treliving brought in the offseason. So I think it was less about the stars. And I mean, I talked about it yesterday. You rewind to 2018, that was kind of the message from the Toronto Maple Leafs team. And you fast forward now, same thing. The depth really showed up. But ultimately, I think the storyline was Joseph Woll in net as well. 27 saves, facing 28 shots in the victory, and he had the huge save in overtime from Brad Marchand and the pressure from the Bruins. And then, of course, the rest of the way, you see Matthew Knies. After having a huge chance in the second period, he scores the game-winning goal. So I do think overall, with all the signs pointing towards the Leafs losing in Game 5 in Boston, a huge victory to shift the momentum.
Okay, John, since we're doing a rewind here, less than 24 hours ago, you and I were talking about this. How has your story changed, your outlook changed?
My outlook has definitely changed, of course. I think when you look at Game 2, that seems like a long time ago in this series when Austin Matthews dominated and the Toronto Maple Leafs really put kind of a statement into the series, tying it 1-1. But since then, it's been all Boston and kind of all negative from this fan base, including myself, I would say, to a certain degree. And I do kind of stand pat on a lot of what I said in terms of the structure of the stars on this team, the coaching from this team, and the power play. I mean, we're talking 0 for 3, 0 for 4 on the power play again in back-to-back games. That's an issue here. Like, you've got to figure out the power play. You squeezed out this victory, but you've got to figure out the power play, because at the end of the day, you still look at Jeremy Swayman on the other side, 31 saves. He still hasn't allowed more than 2 goals against the Toronto Maple Leafs in this series. So while my outlook has changed and you're going back home, the Leafs haven't won at home in this series as well. So there's the positive side. There's definitely the different outlook of they have won this game without Austin Matthews. So if you can get Austin Matthews back for Game 6, you are looking good. You're looking confident. But as I just said, the power play and the fact they haven't been able to win at home is definitely still a concern for me, Bakari.
But, John, can they do it? Game 6, it's tomorrow. And if they get to Game 6, well, how do you see Game 7 playing out? I don't want to, push the cart too far ahead, but
well, it's Toronto-Boston, Bakari, and if anything, regardless of Leafs winning or losing, they always give us the chaos. They always give us some drama. So the drama would be Game 7 in Boston Saturday night, and I think this city, regardless of positive or negative, it's going to be chaotic. So I do think, especially with just the pressure now to shift it back to 7, and regardless if the Leafs win or lose this series, I do think Game 7 is kind of how these two teams, it's always how the stars align with Boston, Toronto. So I do think this goes to 7. I do think Toronto's going to learn from their mistakes here. And at some point, they've got to break through on the power play. So they have the opportunity to maybe shift things around, whether Austin Matthews is in or not. I see this series going to 7 as I kind of predicted after the first couple games, I thought the Leafs could have a chance to close this out in 6, maybe winning that game 3. But I mean, hindsight's everything. Maybe Joseph Woll should have entered the net earlier for Toronto. He's the guy to ride the wave here into Game 7. And being a boy from Massachusetts, it'd be pretty cool to see him kind of go through this Cinderella story. So we'll see what happens here with the Toronto Maple Leafs, but I'm expecting a Game 7 in Boston.
Okay, and like you said, they haven't really won at home. But also, big question, what is going on with Austin Matthews?
It's definitely more than an illness. I think, as you just saw with the Tampa Bay Lightning, they just got eliminated, and John Cooper, head coach of the Lightning, had a long list of guys with injuries that they wouldn't disclose beforehand. So this is more than an illness. Even top insiders in the game don't have the specific information. So you look at the kind of mystery of William Nylander earlier in their series, and past migraines, we really don't have details on what caused it, what he went through, timeline, all those things, similar to Austin Matthews here. Maybe it did start with an illness. That's kind of what the rumors are suggesting here. But we're talking about now missing Game 5 in an elimination game that could have blown up this core. Max Domi had a great quote saying they wanted to give him an opportunity to come back in this series. So it does, I would say, seem positive that if Austin Matthews doesn't return in Game 6, he would return to that hypothetical Game 7. But past that, Bakari, I mean, who knows? Teams always play mind games in the playoffs. We never really get the truth right away.
All right, host of Hot Take Hockey Podcast, John Viveros. Hey, listen, I always appreciate your time. Thanks a lot.
Hey, Bakari, you're the best. I appreciate it.
And thank you for watching CP24 Live at Noon.